Andy, thanks so much for joining us. Really happy to have you here.
You're welcome. Great to be here.
I thought maybe as a starting point, I wanted to give you a moment to introduce yourself, and actually give us like a big project, like something you're really excited about that you're working on, or something that's top of mind.
Well, I've been with Huawei for over 9 years now as Chief Security Officer. And I have a background working for a number of startups, Computer Sciences Corporation, a lengthy legal career, including being a federal prosecutor and counseled the 3 congressional committees. And it's certainly been a very interesting journey being involved in cybersecurity. When you talk about what's going on now, I'm excited by so many things. As you may not know, Huawei's path into open source is very, very substantial. We are very actively working in the importance of virtualization, of cloud. We're investing about $20 billion a year in R&D. So it's just very exciting as the technology moves forward, and the recent attention that cybersecurity has gotten once again with SolarWinds, Microsoft Exchange Server, ransomware attacks. There certainly is greater attention about the importance of doing things. Whether the resolve will be sustained or not is another question. But the staffing of CISA and the priorities of what they're doing, and the emphasis in the Biden executive order on cybersecurity on collaboration and standard setting and accountability, all those things I think are very important and very exciting.
So, and this move to open source, I feel like there's a lot of interesting kind of maybe characteristics behind it, and I want to talk a little bit about it. But before we get there, maybe to just really address the elephant in the room. I think at the end of the day, a lot of people associate Huawei as being really, not only a Chinese entity, but linked at a Chinese government level. Do you find that perception from a West perspective? Do you find that perception to be inaccurate? Are there delineations or pieces that I think we're getting wrong with that type of perception? I mean, ultimately, these devices that we hold in our hands are literally lifeblood for many people at this point. You carry it everywhere you go. From a Chinese kind of invasion of privacy, or from a data privacy perspective, how do you get past that perception, or is that perception accurate? I mean, what really is that level of relationship back to the Chinese government?
Well, let me say it in public discourse in the United States these days. I think there are 2 central narratives, depending on what side you're on and where you're coming from. One is Orange Man bad, and the other one is China bad. And when we look at the geopolitical situation when the Trump administration came in, longstanding issues of both parties with China, and then the way the Trump administration combined a number of different aspects, including the charges and detention of our chief financial officer, aggregating all those in an effort to negotiate with China, trying to get some agricultural purchases, I think, to help provide some benefits for the most recent presidential election year. And so they're developed a toxic political environment that everything about China is bad. And so any action that you take against China, any action you take against Huawei with the intent of hurting China is bad, even if you're not focusing on the question of what is it you're really doing and what's in the best interest of the United States. And the fact is, there are a number of factors that go on, such as the ownership of Huawei, such as the alleged China government influence, of which there's been no information revealed, and the heads of security for France and Germany said that there was no smoking gun on that. The HPSI, House Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations report many years ago didn't really find anything. But the more important question is not about what the laws are, it's what can you do to demonstrate in an objective and transparent way that risk is addressed? And what do you need to do regarding all companies, given the fact that nation states and a few others can hack into just about anybody? And we saw that quite clearly where trusted suppliers were violated in the SolarWinds and Microsoft Exchange Server situations. So no, I don't believe there's any evidence of undue influence in China. But China does some things that really pisses off many people in the United States. And so it just becomes a toxic political environment. Right now, you see legislation which is only tangentially related to China, but they pump it up as an anti-China thing to try to garner a whole lot more support. So we're hoping to have discussions about how one can prove objectively that neither our products nor our people are subject to the undue influence of anyone.
So it's a really tough perception to overcome. At the end of the day, just because the narrative is there, and certainly I agree with you. I think there's a lot of geopolitical tension that magnifies kind of that narrative and makes it something that is a more kind of a household concept. And whether or not there is undue influence or any kind of wrongdoing in the sense that there would be any interactions, there is a perception. So what are you doing, and how can you and really kind of the security program bring that level of perception out of the focus to demonstrate that level of privacy and that level of risk?
Well, and the constant drumbeat and the disinclination of the media, frankly, to turn back the various selective leaks of allegations by the U.S. government to various media outlets. So they don't really question the unfounded allegations and the absence of any proof of improper conduct. You look back a number of years ago, what Edward Snowden revealed in the Operation Shot Giant, that the national security community had monitored all Huawei communications for 5 years. And they could not find any improper communications or improper contact with the China government. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to participate in the major objective standards efforts, 5G, the telecom equipment standards effort and testing effort, the Nessus Network Equipment Security Assurance Scheme, common criteria, numerous other standards. We released our product security baselines recently. We have transparency centers where folks can come in and independently test our products, not just customers. And so we are trying to put in place and working closely with the German government. We're continuing to work with the UK government on our software engineering revamp so that we can establish concretely the objective kinds of criteria that are necessary so that those who want to be able to do business in Huawei, those who want to have the competitive influence of having Huawei in the market in terms of greater innovation, lower cost, and greater security, that they can push back on the U.S. and say, okay, you guys say you care about security, but we have done some objective things, and we're going to continue to do business with Huawei. So hopefully the U.S. is going to do what they said and participate much more actively in the global standards efforts, such as 5G, because that's really important, and hopefully they'll incentivize and help provide financial support for American companies and academia to participate in the standards efforts as well. We will all benefit from that.
And so I wonder, and I guess maybe this is a part of it, right? Open source kind of leads to that level of transparency. Is that a key kind of pillar in the program and the process to, building that level of accountability and trust and transparency?
Well, the fact is, as you know, open source, unless somebody's evaluating the products to see if they have security issues, open source provides transparency, but it doesn't provide security. So we are very actively working in open source, particularly in cloud, because we're a major global cloud provider, and in our operating system for the connectivity of devices, our Harmony OS, which is a proprietary system built on Open Harmony, which is analogous to Google having, or there being the Open Android that underlies the Google proprietary Android. So that encourages developers, encourages folks to have the transparency that's necessary. So we are trying to promote standards, promote the evolution, because the other thing in addition to open source is virtualization. Virtualization is going to give a lot of benefits as we roll out the full 5G. There are going to be, as you know, a number of security enhancements. They're going to make a number of the security issues that existed in 3G and 4G. It's going to address them, but we've got to keep up the continuous effort as full 5G is developed and as new standards and new controls are developed to make sure that those things are put in place.
So with this kind of international standards body, and I think, being at the center of a whole lot of, discourse and controversy, and also in an era and a time where, as you alluded to, I think things are just way less secure than anybody actually believes they are, right? I mean, what was it just today or yesterday, this new zero-day attack on iPhones that from the NSO group that's, kind of commercial spyware for hire, right? So there's a lot of these kind of third-party actors, and I think a lot of them are in the commercial or the organized crime world, but a lot of them are at the nation-state level. As you think about some of the data privacy considerations, some of the bodies and kind of standards that you're contributing to, what should the relationship be from a national government or even from a local government perspective to be able to actually have some interaction and kind of control over devices? I'm thinking even back to all the conversations around terrorism, the conversations around, being able to take the keys to a device, being able to intercept it and unencrypt communications. What should be that balance? And I know this is a longer conversation. Probably nobody really has the right answer, but I'm just curious your take, kind of sitting in your chair and coming from the Huawei side.
Well, we certainly have a major, long-standing debate between a lot of folks in Europe and the United States in terms of to what extent is government going to be allowed at their will to intercept data and gain access to communications. That's part of the reason behind the fact that the European court struck down the privacy shield. Not just that the companies couldn't do certain things, but they couldn't make certain guarantees vis-a-vis the U.S. government. So I think one of the things we need to do is look at the example, in addition to the standards, in addition to the thrust of the Biden executive order, which is trying to promote greater requirements, objectivity, and accountability for government contractors and to create incentives for critical infrastructure, for example. But I think in special relationships, for example, the German government is rolling out this system where they have certain requirements for the telecom operators and mobile operators in terms of what they need to do to address risk from their suppliers. And they need certain visibility into what we and our competitors do so that they can make sure that we are meeting the requirements. And the German government has also put certain requirements, I think it's 11 in all, on the suppliers that they need to do certain things, but it's up to the telecom equipment operators and mobile operators to tell whether or not they do it. And both will be held responsible for their particular aspect. So the special relationship between a supplier and a company should allow much greater transparency than any company, hopefully, would allow for any government. So it shouldn't be government that's in everything, but telecom operators, they need to know what they're dealing with, what the mobile operators are dealing with, and make sure folks are going to be held accountable with procurement requirements, contract requirements, and some requirements imposed by government. But the idea of independent testing, trying to move toward audits of organizations, audits for cybersecurity, audits for privacy, so we have an idea whether companies and organizations are doing what they're supposed to be doing, not just if something terrible happens. We've got to be able to figure out if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing before terrible things happen.
I wonder if, all of the regulations that we're seeing kind of come to bear, right? And I think you've brought up software supply chain integrity a couple of different times. In the context of this executive order, does it even go far enough in terms of the protections, in terms of kind of the desire and the mandate? Should government be more regulatory heavy to make sure that there is, some level of trust across the software supply chain and across kind of, the ability to produce code?
Well, given the criticality of the risk management process, which is really behind an organization helping to protect themselves, an organization assessing their own suppliers, assessing their partners, that takes a certain amount of flexibility. So I think we need to try to avoid unnecessary, overly prescriptive regulation, because that's going to hamstring organizations in being able to do their risk management. You're familiar with the NIST cybersecurity framework, but the idea of an organization having an idea and hopefully with some independent folks making recommendations, independent folks evaluating it and evaluating the path to a better security posture, they can decide, given their business objectives and risk environment, what do they need to do? And then there needs to be a process where the enterprise-wide governance of each organization has very good visibility. They don't need to be experts, very good visibility into whether the requirements are being met. In some cases, things can be so important that they need to be actual regulations. I do think things like the Center for Internet Security Controls, that organizational controls can be part of it, that there needs to be a reason why certain controls might not be implemented by a company. But in addition to best practices and normal risk management, controls like that can be very helpful to reduce the vulnerability to attacks.
We've seen a tremendous shift over the course of the past 18 months. And in many ways, people are more reliant on their mobile device. They're more reliant upon being able to work from a distant location that may not be within their four walls. I think that, kind of obviously spurs a lot of innovation, but it also spurs a lot of risk. And I think within that risk, as we look at our security programs today compared to 5-10 years from now, there are certainly trends that are in motion. What do you think is that top trend that is really going to shape the security program of the future, 5-10 years out?
Well, I think the rollout of full 5G, I think the rollout of standalone 5G, and the security requirements, the security protocols that are part of that are going to have, for example, unified authentication, stronger encryption, greater security when a user moves from the network to roaming, for example. There are a number of things there that will give much greater level of security. And I think if you add to it the strengthened best practices that I think the collaboration coming out of the executive order in the areas, and I think you mentioned them, supply chain assurance and software assurance are going to help contribute to what those requirements ought to be, what kind of independent testing there ought to be, and what kind of consequences there can be for non-conformance. Because generally, we really don't hold folks accountable for their failure to do what they're supposed to do. And it's particularly bad in the privacy realm in the United States.
Yeah, I get the sense that a lot of times there's a big stick that never gets wielded, partially because to a certain extent, I think we also, almost universally recognize that security ends up being a losing battle most of the time. So those types of tightening down of restrictions, I think it would be really interesting to understand if the government has a way to actually step in. But to your point, I think, private sector is ultimately going to have to be the one that takes care of this. As you think about, your program, as you think about kind of the future of the industry, what would be that kind of prime advice that you would give any of the other CISOs or any other security leaders that might be listening in today?
Well, I think there are a lot of people that are better situated than me to give such overarching advice. I think the recommended best practices, I think the standards, I think the undertaking to understand which security controls are appropriate for your particular enterprise, what kinds of procurement requirements you can put in for who you buy from, what kind of operational requirements you can have. But we got to get beyond the idea that the leaders of company, they're not cybersecurity experts, so they can't. No. We need to have, each organization has to have an enterprise-wide risk management governance process. There need to be requirements that are set and informed by experts. There needs to be separation of duties within each organization. And there need to be some independent review where the information goes to the leadership, including the board of directors, about whether you're doing whether you're doing that. Look at the lessons learned from OPM in terms of the government agencies, where you come out of that breach from many years ago, and there were a number of requirements that were imposed on government agencies, and they did a recent audit recently, I think OMB, and they said that at least one of those was not implemented by any government agency. That is the government not caring, not taking this stuff seriously, and it's inexcusable. And I think that what's being set in motion by the executive order and the role of OMB in setting requirements, the role of OMB in providing funding, and the role of OMB in providing accountability for the leaders of government agencies, hopefully can help move in that direction. But we got to remember the words of Senator King of Maine, where he said the recent attacks serve as a wake-up call. But we all keep falling back asleep after we get wake-up calls, and that's the truth.
I wonder, honestly, if we've learned our lessons. You look at so many breaches that they just should have been solved by hygiene, let alone by, some advanced, methodology or something kind of net new. It's almost like people keep, protecting all of the indoor rooms of the house, but then leave the front door completely off the hinge and completely open, right? So,
well, I think that's related to the accountability. So take one example, the multi-decade now promise of cyber insurance as being the incentive. The fact is they shouldn't allow organizations to have cyber insurance. They shouldn't allow boards of directors to have errors and omissions insurance. They shouldn't allow them to have it at all if they don't have some kind of a governance structure, if they don't have some kind of an approach to risk management, to the NIST cybersecurity framework. And then there needs to be reporting internally. And if they don't do what they're supposed to be doing, they should be held liable. That should be considered gross negligence. So accountability is something that we really have not taken seriously. And I think there's a lot of room to do that. I think globally there are a number of things that we can do as well.
So in some ways, I feel like that's obviously an advocacy for the stick. But is there a carrot option around this as well? I mean, there are a lot of organizations that I feel like they wish they would have better access to talent, better, ability to compete, better, guidance and programs beyond something like a NIST standard, which barely does anything, right? So is there a carrot option here as well?
Well, I think in terms of the ability of companies to do business, to be able to have a stronger story. I do think the government, we've got to recognize the difficulty in terms of workforce issues. Ed Amoroso has recommended a cyber corps, which actually I think Georgia Tech has a program like that. But the idea of trying to make sure there are enough experts out there, and that there can be like a bench where the centralized or government, federal or state, can provide some folks to help some of the major organizations, beginning in critical infrastructure and eventually in the medium small business, that we've got to recognize we don't have the people, and we've got to do what's necessary to get the people, because there are plenty of people out there who could be qualified to be trained in some of these jobs. And it's kind of like the workforce of the future. We're talking about the fourth industrial revolution, but we need a future work strategy. We need to make sure that our lead in technology ahead of China is going to continue to grow, and workforce is going to be critical to that. But it's almost like we're just not paying attention to it.
It's certainly a difficult balancing act to bear, for sure, how much government should be involved. And I want to thank you again, Andy, for taking time to chat with us and really talk through some of the geopolitical aspects. Really a pleasure, and we look forward of all the things to come.
You're quite welcome.